For anyone that's been following along on our acquisition process journey, we've talked about initial considerations when selling your startup. We've talked about sourcing potential buyers, and we've talked about reviewing offers. So now we're getting into the due diligence process. So going back to basics on that, what is due diligence? What areas are investors scrutinizing when we're going through the due diligence process?
So the due diligence, I had heard people talk about that before, but I mean, it's completely different when you're actually experiencing it. But it's basically a time when the buyer gets to kind of investigate the company that they're trying to buy or invest into to make sure that you have the goods. So it's kind of a vulnerable process. Like you have to kind of open up your process, your systems, even your financial statements and books to the buyer in order to prove that what you're representing, this healthy startup that you're looking to sell or get money for, is indeed what you claim it to be. So this is the point in the relationship where you actually have to provide proof. So one of the big ones is financial statements. They want at least, I think, the last couple of years worth of financial statements, the actual federal filing. So, the stuff that you can't really fake, that shows how much revenue you're claiming, how much profit came from that. You're submitting your P&Ls, you're listing out your different vendors and costs. And that can be, exposing it and vulnerable. I've talked to a couple of founders who are looking to sell, and one of the things that they worry about is, this bigger company or even like a complementary type company is looking to acquire us, but I'm afraid that if I open up the books and I tell them, here's our partners, here's what we pay, here's our margins, you're basically telling them the secret sauce that makes your company. Like, this is our process, here's our playbooks, here's all of our costs broken out, and it creates this vulnerability. Like, if they really had bad intentions, or maybe they look at that and say, okay, now we know how they do it, we could recreate this on our own. That is a possibility. So I would say before you get to that point, it's definitely something to consider, and you don't want to get too far down the road with someone that you're seeing red flags with, or that you doubt their intentions, or even if they knew exactly how you did this, acquiring you should still make sense, because they don't want to start from scratch. They don't want to build something all the way from zero. They want to take over something that's already in motion. So the financial papers and reports are a big one. The other one is your systems and processes. So if you have standard operating procedures, they want to see that. They want to see like what assets you have in place to make this whole process smoother. How do you onboard? How do you train your staff? How do you deliver reports and services to the actual client? And that's basically like another group of assets that your company has. And again, if they were going to start over from scratch, because they want a LinkedIn ads agency, but then you have all of this already built. We have, we had all these training documents, we had onboarding documents, we had templates to deliver stuff to clients. All those would take a lot of time to recreate from scratch. Another one was actual team breakdown. So the buyer wants to understand who's on your team, how long have they been on your team, what are you paying those team members, what does that compensation structure look like, are there benefits? And they basically want to understand, if whether they're taking you or not as the founder or the seller. If they're not taking you with this sale, then who's left, who are the key players, and they want to ensure that there's people there that could carry it on without you. Or if it's very dependent on there being a founder, they want to know that too. I think the last part of due diligence, and I had a breakdown that we can probably share, like a checklist eventually, but I think some of the other stuff was, they also wanted to know just like ideas and philosophy. Like, so why are you priced the way you are? What is your position in the market? How have you differentiated yourself from others in the market? So they kind of want to get an idea of like your business and your startup philosophy and kind of what's underlying, like what's motivating all this. So the nuts and bolts of your finances, your team, your processes, your product, and then also the underlying just philosophy that's kind of guiding it. They want to know all of that, which is a lot.
Yeah, that's a lot. It's almost like opening yourself up for exposure.
Yeah, it's more intense than like the most intense interview process, because even in interview processes, they're not like, can you imagine if they were asking like, we're going to run your credit check, we're going to look at your bank statements, we're going to look at your last 3 years of tax filings. Like, I mean, that's pretty serious.
It's scary. Yeah. Yeah. The financial part of it is a big piece too, especially if you feel like, maybe your numbers don't tell the full story of your business.
Yeah. And that's a big one. Yeah. Your camera doesn't like you. There we go.
I don't know how to fix this. Okay.
It's like autofocus technology. And we work for a tech company. Mine's better these days.
So for the key areas that, investors were kind of scrutinizing during due diligence, what I've gathered is the financial statements or runway that you have existing, your statement of processes, so how you kind of go through the systems to complete the offerings that you have, and if it's a scalable process, your team breakdown, so who's going to be involved in that transition over, and then any kind of philosophical ideas that you have behind the business, your unique value proposition, what makes you different from other competitors.
Yeah, correct. Oh, the last thing I forgot to mention is they want to look behind the scenes of like your web traffic, so they get access to your Google Analytics and ad accounts. Like you would add them if they're a savvy like buyer, they would want to see the traffic for themselves. They'd want to see like if you've invested in SEO, because it's one thing to like tell them, hey, we get our clients from all these different areas and our website's established, but they can actually jump in there, see your authority score, see your website traffic, see all the different sources that you're getting that from, and see the maturity of your ad channels, which I thought, I for sure would want to do that if I was a buyer. But it kind of caught me off guard that I guess they were savvy enough to be asking for all that access. And that was interesting to me.
Yeah, and it does make a lot of sense, especially coming from, our point of view as LinkedIn ads experts. That is one of the areas that we look at when we're looking at potential clients, is like, what is their website traffic look like? Does it make them a viable client for us? Because if they're not having that healthy website traffic, it's going to be a lot more difficult to give them the success that they want to see.
Yeah, I agree.
Awesome. So with due diligence, so this was a lot of steps that you went through, a lot of, paperwork that you had to submit in order for the due diligence process to kind of go through the way it has. How long did that process last for you, and how much time per week were you setting aside in order to kind of pull that information together?
It took about 2 or 3 weeks, and I was spending. So the thing that sucked the most about it is it was a very time consuming process that's done on top of all your regular duties. So we were still running a scaling agency that required a lot of my time. And then this was, I don't know, a couple hours a day, and then 3 or 4 hours like a day on the weekends for 2 to 3 weeks trying to get all this together. Like it was a lot. Like they gave me this due diligence breakdown, and it was like 30 line items, and each line item could take 2 or 3 hours. Like one of them was just getting our financial statements from a specific whatever, and that took time to get together. Another one was the breakdown of our team and org chart and pay and all of that. And so each line item of this 20 or 30 checklist could take anywhere from 1 to like 3 hours to get together. So very time consuming, and had to be done on top of running the operations, but lasted for about 2 to 3 weeks. And basically what would happen is they would make the asks, and then once I got a section done, I was like check marking that section was done and linking to like a document that had the information that was requested, and then the buyer would have a chance to like jump on a call and like go over those and ask further questions. So just getting that was a huge task, and then that was the jumping off point of where they wanted to like dig in deeper, like tell me more about this, or here, now that I've looked in here, I have these 5 questions, and then you were responding to that. So very, very intense. I think now looking back at it, I've probably forgotten how much it was, because when I was going through it, I definitely remember thinking that it was 10 times more intense than I had expected.
Mm-hmm. It's almost like having another part-time job on top of your full-time job as a startup founder.
Yeah, and it's they don't want you to do anything crazy while you're in negotiations. So I was instructed not to roll out anything new or hire anyone new, or even like adjust our marketing up or down. So I almost felt like we were in this like limbo where, and if anyone knows me, like I like to move fast. If I have an idea, I like to act on it. And so I almost felt like during this process of not just due diligence, but during this buying process, while I was negotiating with multiple possible buyers, I felt like I also had to decide to commit to that process, because I supposedly wasn't supposed to do anything crazy or drastic or new like with the startup while I was in talks with these people. So that felt a little like handcuffed to me, which was also an odd feeling.
Yeah, it makes sense logistically that you don't want anything big to change while you're going through this process of potentially, bringing on a new investor or selling your startup. But that is really difficult because I know, especially with smaller, more flexible startups, we always want to be moving and we always want to be innovating.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So, with your due diligence process, were there any big red flags or issues that were raised about your business, and how did you go about resolving those?
Yeah, probably the funniest one was that the buyer reached out and said something to the effect of, just so as we were doing our due diligence on our side, because they're investigating all these different things, our lawyer discovered that your LLC was actually dissolved and is not a legitimate LLC in good standing right now. The language is like, this needs to be rectified as soon as possible. Otherwise, we can't proceed with any further discussions. And so it's just like, I mean, caught me off guard. Like, that's not something that had even crossed my mind to like check. Or it's also like, it was the first time I ever even filed an LLC. So there's, upkeep and whatnot that, I thought I was compliant with. Apparently I wasn't. So basically what happened is there's these quarterly and annual filings, and there's taxes that need to be paid on it. Of course, I'm filing my annual federal filings and paying the taxes. But there was something I missed. And so after so much time had passed, it goes into administrative dissolvement. And so they basically just like made it look inactive. And all I had to do, thankfully, was make a couple of phone calls, and I had to pay like $50 and a refiling fee and something else. Like it was a really light thing, but I had to file two separate things, pay a small fee, make a couple calls, and within like, I don't know, 5 days, it was back in good standing and updated on all the proper websites. So that felt probably like a little embarrassing. Like, you're trying to sell a startup and they're telling you that it's not like a real LLC anymore, that it got dissolved, and that feels like an oversight.
I
Of
mean, that's a
course.
scary email to get. I would be terrified.
Yeah. I think, yeah, I mean, I was terrified. I feel like them knowing like how probably that could happen, they were probably way more experienced with that. So maybe they were less worried. They were just like, maybe they've seen this before. But to
Mhm.
me, that felt like, that could be the end of the world. Like, we're talking about the biggest payout I've ever seen in my life. And they're telling me like something so stupid that was, of course, my fault. Like, if I didn't file the right paper at the right time, like, there's no one else's fault other than mine. And if that actually like discouraged the buyer from continuing, because maybe in their mind that then shows like, this guy doesn't pay attention to details, uh
Yeah.
and me being part of the deal. So yeah, all of that crossed my mind, and I probably would have been very disappointed if like they just pulled out and be like, there's too many red flags. The other one, probably not that came from due diligence, but the other thing that's kind of funny is when the deal was settled, and it was like they put their money in escrow, and then so it's like just a third party that's holding on to the money, then we both sign, and then the money from the third party escrow gets released to me. But we came to discover that everything had gone really fast. I had never set up like a legitimate business bank account for my business. I had two separate bank accounts that I was using personally. I had Chase and I had Fifth Third. I used one pretty much exclusively for the business, but it was still a personal bank account. And I
Mhm.
had never really gotten around to just setting that up. And so, and I was still paying all the proper filing, or my taxes and everything, but it was just like, yeah, one of my personal bank accounts. And then they go to transfer this money to my account, and they just like, again, I just remember them like, maybe I just took the tone different because I felt like stupid about it. And they were like, it's saying that this is a personal bank account. We can't transfer like this kind of money to a personal bank account. This is a business transaction sale. It has to be transferred to a business account. Like, you're going to need to fix that like now. And so I made some calls, went to my local bank, opened up a business account like ASAP, and I had those routing numbers ready for them. And so the next day, I had that account for them to transfer. But that was probably the other slightly embarrassing thing that happened during the whole process.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you want to look at it from a silver lining perspective, at least, those things were uncovered during the due diligence process, and you probably learned a lot about owning a business just through, little mishaps here and there.
Yeah, I think obviously the next time I started something up, I would have it segmented to its own business account early on. I'd have it completely separated. I'd be paying myself from that. I think I had people that were working for me that had better segmentation of their stuff than me. Like I was paying them as 1099 contractors, and they set themselves up as LLCs, set themselves up with a bank account, and were paying themselves through like Gusto, which like which is what you're supposed to be doing, but apparently I was just moving fast and making mistakes. Thankfully that didn't come back to bite me, and it didn't sour the relationship with the buyer. They were very understanding, and it was almost just like, yeah, I remember my first startup kind of attitude from them, like very gracious with any mistakes I made. And then they even lend me, like I was able to advise with like some of their legal team as well, just on like separate issues, and they were very nice about keeping things impartial. And honestly I felt like I got an education during that, and I didn't feel like maneuvered or manipulated. I honestly felt slightly insecure about my lack of knowledge on some of this while going through it, which is it's like you get into a startup and you're doing good. You cross the threshold where you're doing seven figures, and you think like you're kind of on top of the world. You think like you start to think you actually know what you're doing, and then you get in a room with people that have built things 100 times bigger than that, and you feel like you're a freshman at college again, and you quickly realize that you really don't know anything, which is very humbling.
Yes, definitely. Well, you live and you learn. And I think
Yeah.
if anything, as long as it was a good learning experience, that's all you can really ask for.
Yeah. So it was a good experience, and I'm sure I'll be much more equipped for next time when I have another exit. My second exit from this company, I won't be the one dealing with the main negotiations. Obviously, the main investor now, but if I had something else on the side or another startup that was mine, I'd probably get a broker of my own, and get legal help on my side while going through it, instead of kind of waiting to go through that process and being like given those assets from either the seller or the broker, the intermediate. So definitely some big lessons for next
Yeah,
time.
that's a good one too. We might make this a separate episode on what you
Yes.
would do if you were starting from scratch again, what you would do
Yeah.
differently.
And hire a financial planner for what happens afterwards, so you can minimize your tax liability would probably be a big one I'd put on the list.
Oh, yeah.
Because
Great.
boom.
Well, that
Okay.
is all I have for us today.